I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good.
William made one phone call and Camilla's allies were gone. No warning, no negotiation, no appeal process. The Prince of Wales had decided that his royal foundation would no longer be a space where his stepmother's influence operated unchallenged. Here is the full story. The appointment that caught the palace off guard. There are moves within the British royal family that announce themselves quietly and land loudly. They do not come with press conferences or carefully prepared statements designed to manage the narrative before it takes hold. They come instead with the kind of swift, deliberate precision that signals to everyone paying attention that the person making the move has been thinking about it for a very long time and has chosen their moment with care.
On entering Westminster Abbey yesterday were a pledge of service. It was a pledge to continue to...
The surprise appointment Prince William made to the Royal Foundation in the early months of 2025 was exactly that kind of move. And according to those with knowledge of the internal dynamics of the royal household, the reverberations it produced were immediate, significant, and entirely consistent with what William intended. The appointment itself was not, on the surface, the kind of decision that would attract attention from anyone outside the relatively narrow world of royal institutional management. The Royal Foundation, the charitable organization established by William and Catherine as the primary vehicle for their philanthropic work, makes appointments and adjustments to its leadership and advisory structures on a periodic basis. Those changes are occasionally noted in the press, but rarely generate the kind of sustained interest that attaches to the more visible aspects of royal life. William understood that, and sources familiar with his thinking say that the low-profile nature of foundation appointments was precisely what made the Royal Foundation the ideal arena in which to make a move that carried consequences far beyond what its formal description suggested. What made this particular appointment different was not the position being filled, but the position being vacated in order to fill it. The new appointment brought into the foundation's inner structure someone whose loyalty to William and Catherine was unambiguous, and whose professional background gave them genuine credibility in the charitable sector. But the more significant aspect of the decision, according to insiders, was the simultaneous removal of individuals whose presence within the foundation had long been a source of quiet discomfort for William's most trusted advisors. Those removals did not happen accidentally or as an incidental consequence of an unrelated restructuring. They were, sources say, the point of the exercise. The manner in which the decision was communicated internally is described by those familiar with the situation as deliberately efficient. The individuals whose roles were being terminated received notification through formal channels with a brevity that left little room for discussion or negotiation. There were no preliminary conversations in which the possibility of the changes was floated and feedback invited. There were no transitional arrangements that might have softened the message or introduced ambiguity about its permanence. The notifications were clear, final, and, in the assessment of those who received them and those who observed the process, intentionally so. William had made a decision, and he had made it in a way that communicated his absolute confidence in its finality. Sources say the speed of the process was itself a message. Inside the royal household, where decisions of institutional significance are typically preceded by lengthy consultations, careful negotiations, and the kind of elaborate consensus building that reflects the monarchy's deep instinct for managing change incrementally, the pace at which William moved was striking. Those who work closely with him say it reflected a deliberateness that has been growing more visible in his approach to institutional matters over the past 2 years. William is not, by the accounts of those who know him well, a man who acts impulsively. When he moves quickly, it is because he has already completed the slower work of thinking through what he wants to achieve and how he intends to achieve it. The swiftness of the foundation appointments was the visible expression of a decision that had been reached through a much longer internal process. The reaction within the palace when the news of the appointments filtered through the various layers of the royal household was, according to insiders, one of immediate alertness. Those with knowledge of the individuals who had been removed understood at once what their presence in the foundation had represented, and therefore what their removal signaled. Camilla's office, sources say, became aware of the changes within hours of the notifications going out. The response in that quarter is described by those familiar with the situation as one of controlled but unmistakable tension. The people around the Queen Consort who processed the news first understood immediately that what had happened was not an administrative adjustment, it was a declaration. For those watching the broader dynamics of the royal family, the timing of William's move added another layer of significance to an already charged decision. It came during a period in which the tensions between different centers of power within the royal household had been building with unusual visibility. The disputes over Sandringham access, the reported conflicts between Prince Edward and Camilla, and the broader questions circulating within palace circles about the expanding reach of the Queen Consort's influence had created an atmosphere in which William's decision landed not as an isolated incident, but as part of a pattern that suggested the next generation of the monarchy was drawing lines around its own territory with a clarity and a confidence that the current generation of senior royals was finding increasingly difficult to ignore. What those lines mean, who drew them, and what they reveal about the man who will one day be king requires a closer examination of the individuals who were removed from the foundation and what their presence there had actually represented. Because understanding why William acted requires understanding precisely what he was acting against. Who was removed and what they represented. To understand the full significance of the removals from the royal foundation, it is necessary to understand how Camilla's allies came to be embedded within William's most important institutional vehicle in the first place. Because their presence there did not happen through a single deliberate act of infiltration or through any obvious breach of the boundaries that William and Catherine had always maintained around the foundation. It happened the way that influence almost always spreads within the royal household, gradually, incrementally, through the accumulation of small accommodations and quiet adjustments that each seemed reasonable in isolation, but that collectively produced an outcome nobody had explicitly authorized. The individuals connected to Camilla's network, who found themselves inside the foundation's advisory and operational structures, had arrived there through a variety of routes. Some had professional credentials that made their involvement appear entirely merit-based. They brought expertise in areas directly relevant to the Foundation's work, in mental health advocacy, in environmental policy, in charitable sector management, and their initial appointments had been made on grounds that were difficult to challenge on professional terms alone. Others had arrived through the social connections that inevitably develop between households operating in close proximity within the royal world. Relationships built at shared engagements, at private family gatherings, and through the overlapping networks of aristocratic and philanthropic London had created pathways into the foundation that bypassed the more formal vetting processes that William's team applied to external appointments. What united these individuals, despite the variety of their routes into the foundation, was a consistency of orientation that William's closest advisors had been tracking, with growing concern for the better part of 2 years. Sources say that concerns about the loyalty and the information management practices of certain foundation figures had been raised internally on multiple occasions before William made his move. The specific concern was not that these individuals were actively working against the Foundation's charitable mission. It was that their presence created channels through which sensitive information about the Foundation's internal deliberations, its strategic priorities, and its relationship with the broader royal household was finding its way to people outside the organization whose primary loyalty was not to William and Catherine. Inside an organization like the Royal Foundation, where strategic decisions about public positioning, charitable partnerships, and institutional relationships are made on the basis of frank internal discussions, the existence of those information channels represented a genuine vulnerability. William and Catherine have always treated the Foundation as a space where their most considered thinking about their future role could be developed and tested away from the pressures of public scrutiny. The idea that those discussions were being monitored, even indirectly, by people whose ultimate allegiances lay elsewhere, was one that William had tolerated for longer than those closest to him believed was wise. The specific individuals removed are not named publicly by sources, who cite the sensitivity of the situation and the potential for legal complications as reasons for their discretion. But insiders are consistent in their description of what those individuals represented within the Foundation's structure. They occupied positions that gave them access to internal communications, to forward planning documents, and to the kind of candid strategic discussions that the Foundation's leadership conducts in preparation for major initiatives. That access, in the hands of people whose loyalties were divided, was the problem that William's appointments were designed to solve. What the removals represented, beyond their immediate practical effect, was a statement about the kind of institution William intends the Royal Foundation to be as he moves closer to the throne. It is to be an organization whose inner workings are protected from the competing interests and informal influence networks that have increasingly characterized the broader royal household under the current reign. A space where his thinking can develop freely and where the people around him are present because they have earned his trust through demonstrated loyalty rather than through this kind of gradual institutional embedding that had allowed Camilla's network to gain its foothold. The message of the removals was therefore as much about the future as it was about the present, and Camilla's circle received it with the clarity William intended. William and Camilla, the fault line that never fully closed. There is a public version of the relationship between Prince William and Queen Camilla that the palace has worked consistently hard to present as the definitive one. It is a version in which a young man who initially struggled with his father's relationship eventually came to accept and even appreciate the woman who had become such a central part of Charles's life. In this version, maturity and time did the work that resistance and grief could not. William grew up, the narrative goes, and in growing up, he made his peace with a reality that his younger self had found painful. It is a tidy story, and like most tidy stories about the royal family, it papers over a complexity that has never fully resolved itself, and that has been quietly shaping William's decisions and attitudes for the entirety of his adult life. The truth, according to those who have observed the relationship between William and Camilla with genuine proximity, is considerably more layered. William did not grow into acceptance of Camilla in the straightforward way the public narrative suggests. What he grew into was a sophisticated understanding of how to manage a relationship that he could not avoid without also managing the damage that avoiding it would do to his father and to the institution. He learned to be present without being warm, to be respectful without being close, to perform the appearance of familial acceptance while maintaining, in the private spaces of his own household and his own council, a set of reservations about Camilla's character and her institutional ambitions that have never genuinely softened. Those reservations have their roots in the period that shaped William most profoundly. The breakdown of his parents' marriage, conducted in public with a visibility and a brutality that no child should have to witness, left marks on William that those close to him say have never fully healed. He was 11 years old when the separation was announced. He was 15 when his mother died. In the years between those two events, he watched the woman his father had always loved move closer to the center of a family that his mother had been pushed to the edges of. That experience did not make William hate Camilla, but it made him watch her, carefully, consistently, with the particular attention of someone who understands from lived experience what the consequences of misplaced trust within this family can look like. As William has moved closer to the throne, those watching instincts have sharpened rather than softened. Sources close to him say that his assessment of Camilla's behavior since the king's accession has confirmed rather than contradicted the reservations he developed in earlier years. The expansion of her inner circle, the embedding of her trusted figures in institutional spaces adjacent to his own, and what he perceives as a consistent pattern of prioritizing her personal network's interests over the broader good of the institution have all registered with William as evidence of exactly the kind of behavior he has always been cautious about. The Royal Foundation removals need to be understood against that backdrop. They were not a spontaneous reaction to a recent provocation. They were the product of years of careful observation, of a gradually hardening assessment of what Camilla's influence within the institution represented, and of a deliberate strategic calculation about when and how to act on that assessment. William chose the Foundation as the arena for his response because it is the space he controls most completely, and because protecting it from outside influence is a prerequisite for the kind of independent institutional identity he is building for himself and Catherine ahead of their eventual accession. The fault line between William and Camilla has never fully closed because the conditions that created it have never fully changed. The woman his father married is still, in William's private assessment, someone whose loyalty is ultimately to her own position and her own circle rather than to the institution as a whole. And the Prince of Wales, who will one day be responsible for that institution's survival, has decided that the time for accommodating that reality quietly has passed. What that decision means for the palace going forward is something Camilla's circle is only beginning to fully reckon with. The Royal Foundation, as William's power base. To fully appreciate why William's decision to remove Camilla's allies from the Royal Foundation carries the weight that it does, it is necessary to understand what the Foundation actually represents within the broader architecture of the modern monarchy. Because the Royal Foundation is not, despite its charitable status and its public-facing identity as a vehicle for good causes, simply an organization that raises money and supports worthy initiatives. It is, for William and Catherine, something considerably more significant than that. It is the institutional expression of their vision for what the monarchy should become. It is the space in which the ideas, values, and priorities that will define their reign are being developed, tested, and gradually brought into public focus. And it is, in the most direct sense available to them before accession, their power base. The foundation was established in 2009, initially as the William and Harry Foundation, before Harry's departure from royal duties, necessitated a restructuring that left William and Catherine as its sole royal principals. In the years since, it has grown into one of the most significant charitable organizations in Britain, with a portfolio of initiatives spanning mental health, environmental sustainability, early childhood development, and community resilience. Its public profile is substantial. Its relationships with major philanthropic donors, corporate partners, and civil society organizations give it a reach and an influence that extends well beyond the world of royal patronage into the broader landscape of British public life. And its leadership, both in terms of the staff who run its day-to-day operations and the advisory figures who shape its strategic direction, reflects William and Catherine's most considered judgments about who they trust and what they want to achieve. What the foundation has also become, less visibly but no less importantly, is a laboratory for the future reign. The initiatives William and Catherine have developed through the foundation over the past decade reveal, with considerable clarity, the priorities that will define their approach to kingship. The Earthshot Prize, launched in 2020 and designed to accelerate solutions to the world's most pressing environmental challenges, reflects William's conviction that the monarchy must engage seriously and substantively with the defining issues of the age rather than retreating into the ceremonial safety of traditional royal patronage. The work on early childhood development, championed by Catherine with a depth of personal commitment that has surprised even some of her most enthusiastic supporters, signals an intention to use the platform of the monarchy to drive genuine change in areas of social policy that other institutions have consistently under-prioritized. These are not small ambitions. They represent a vision of the monarchy as an active participant in addressing the challenges of contemporary life rather than a passive symbol of national continuity. And they require, for their realization, an organizational infrastructure that is genuinely aligned with William and Catherine's values and genuinely free from the competing agendas that have historically complicated the functioning of royal institutions. The presence of individuals whose primary loyalties lay outside the Wales household was therefore not merely an irritant to William. It was a structural impediment to the kind of independent institutional development that his long-term vision for the foundation requires. Sources close to William say his thinking about the foundation's role in his future reign has become considerably more focused over the past 2 years, a period that has coincided with the king's illness and the consequent acceleration of William's own preparation for accession. As the reality of his future responsibilities has moved from the abstract to the increasingly concrete, his tolerance for anything that compromises the integrity of his most important institutional vehicle has diminished correspondingly. The foundation is where he is building the architecture of his reign, and he is not prepared to build that architecture in a space that is not entirely his own. The question of how Camilla's allies came to occupy positions within that space is one that William's team has examined with considerable care in the period leading up to the removals. The answer, sources say, reflects a pattern that is familiar from other areas of the royal household. The embedment happened gradually, through the exploitation of the natural social and professional overlaps that exist within the relatively small world of British aristocratic and philanthropic life. Individual appointments that each seemed defensible on their own terms accumulated over time into a presence that, viewed collectively, represented a meaningful degree of influence over an organization that William had always intended to keep firmly within his own circle of trust. The realization that this had happened and the assessment of its implications is described by sources as a significant moment in William's development as an institutional actor. It demonstrated to him, with uncomfortable clarity, how easily the informal influence networks that operate within the royal world can penetrate even the spaces that are most carefully guarded against them. And it reinforced his understanding that protecting the Foundation's integrity was not a task that could be delegated or managed at arm's length. It required his direct and sustained personal attention. The appointments he made in the early months of 2025 were therefore not simply a correction of a specific problem. They were the expression of a broader philosophy about how he intends to manage the institutions under his control as he moves toward the throne. A philosophy built on the conviction that the people inside his circle must be there because they have earned their place through demonstrated loyalty and genuine alignment with his values, not because the informal dynamics of palace life deposited them there through a process that nobody explicitly authorized and nobody explicitly reviewed. William is building something, and he has decided, with the clarity that comes from years of careful observation and patient preparation, that he will build it on foundations he has chosen himself. Camilla's response, and the palace. Fallout. There are two ways that powerful people inside the British royal family respond to moves that challenge their position. The first is visible and immediate. It involves the deployment of the considerable communications resources available to senior royals, the careful placement of sympathetic stories in friendly media outlets, the activation of social networks to generate a counter-narrative, and the kind of public positioning that signals confidence and control even when the private reality is considerably more complicated. The second response is quieter, slower, and in the assessment of most people who have observed the royal family's internal dynamics over a long period of time, considerably more dangerous. It involves saying very little, absorbing the blow with outward composure, and beginning the patient work of identifying where and how a response can be delivered that will be felt at the time and place of the responding party's choosing, rather than the provoking party's. Those who know Camilla well say she is, by instinct and by long experience, a practitioner of the second approach, and the response she has been quietly assembling since William's Foundation appointments became known is one that those close to the situation describe as measured, deliberate, and far from finished. The immediate reaction within Camilla's household when the removals became known is described by insiders as one of controlled fury. The Queen Consort herself is said to have received the news with the kind of surface composure that has become her most reliable public instrument. But those around her who know how to read the signals say the stillness she projected in those first hours was not calm. It was the stillness of someone processing a significant provocation and deciding very carefully how to respond to it. The people around her who were most directly affected by the removals were, understandably, considerably less composed. Sources describe a period of intense internal discussion within Camilla's circle in the days immediately following the appointments, characterized by a mixture of genuine shock at the directness of William's move and a rapid reassessment of the assumptions about his intentions that had been operating within that circle up to that point. What appears to have surprised Camilla's allies most was not the fact that William harbored reservations about their presence in the Foundation. Some of them had long understood that their position there was not entirely comfortable for the Wales household. What surprised them was the manner and the timing of the move. The expectation within Camilla's circle, sources say, had been that any adjustment to the Foundation's personnel would be managed through the kind of gradual, negotiated process that characterizes most significant decisions within the royal household. The directness of William's approach, the absence of any prior consultation or any opportunity for a managed transition, communicated something about his intentions that went well beyond the specific decision being made. It communicated that he was no longer operating within the framework of accommodation and careful consensus that had governed his relationship with Camilla's circle up to that point. He had moved to a different mode entirely, and that shift, more than any specific personnel change, was what generated the most significant anxiety within the Queen Consort's household. Camilla's formal response, delivered through the carefully managed channels of palace communications, was characteristically neutral. No public statement was issued that acknowledged the removals or the tensions surrounding them. No royal correspondent received a briefing that placed the foundation changes in the context of a broader dispute. The official position of the Queen Consort's office was, in effect, that nothing of particular significance had occurred. It was the palace's most reliable tool for managing uncomfortable realities, and it was deployed with the practiced efficiency that those who manage royal communications have refined over decades of navigating exactly these kinds of situations. But the private response was, according to sources, considerably more active. Camilla's most trusted advisors began almost immediately to map the implications of William's move and to identify the areas in which her own position and influence could be reinforced in response. The foundation removals had demonstrated that William was prepared to act decisively in spaces he controlled directly. The question Camilla's circle began working through was which spaces those were, and which spaces remained available for the kind of influence that her network had been quietly building across the broader royal household since the king's accession. The fallout from the appointments extended beyond the immediate households of William and Camilla. Throughout the broader royal family and the wider circle of courtiers, advisors, and institutional figures who make up the extended world of the monarchy, the news of what William had done produced a recalibration of assessments about where power within the institution was moving. Sources describe a period of unusually active informal communication within those circles in the weeks following the foundation changes, as people who had been watching the gradual shift in William's approach to institutional matters updated their understanding of what that shift meant in practice. For some, the recalibration produced a movement toward William's camp that reflected a straightforward assessment of where the future of the institution lay. Several figures who had previously maintained careful neutrality between the Wales household and the king's court are described by sources as having signaled, through the subtle channels of royal social communication, a closer alignment with William's position following the foundation appointments. The directness and the confidence of his move had, for these individuals, resolved uncertainties about his intentions and his capabilities that had previously made full commitment to his camp seem premature. For others, the recalibration produced the opposite reaction. Figures whose positions were more directly tied to Camilla's continued influence found themselves investing more actively in reinforcing those ties, understanding that the foundation removals represented a challenge to a network they depended upon, and that the challenge required a collective rather than an individual response. The palace fallout from William's appointments was therefore not simply a bilateral dispute between a stepson and a stepmother. It was a realignment of the broader institutional landscape of the monarchy, and its implications for the future of the royal family extend well beyond the specific personnel decisions that triggered it. What William's move signals about the future monarchy. There is a moment in the life of every future monarch when the transition from heir to king stops being theoretical and starts being practical, when the decisions being made are no longer rehearsals for a future role, but the actual work of building the foundations on which that role will rest. For Prince William, the appointments to the royal foundation and the removal of Camilla's allies from its inner structure represent exactly that kind of moment. They are not the actions of a man positioning himself for a reign that remains comfortably distant. They are the actions of a man who understands that the reign is coming and who has decided, with the clarity and the confidence of someone who has been preparing for this his entire life, that the time for accommodating inconvenient realities within his institutional circle has passed. Those who have studied the trajectory of William's development as a future king describe a man who has undergone a significant evolution in his approach to the responsibilities that await him. In his earlier years, William was characterized by a deliberate distance from the more political dimensions of royal life. He was careful, cautious, and consistently reluctant to be drawn into the institutional disputes and power dynamics that have always existed beneath the surface of the monarchy's public face. That caution was understandable and in many ways admirable. It reflected a young man's awareness of the damage that premature or misjudged interventions in palace politics could do to the credibility he would need to lead the institution effectively when his time came. But caution, sustained beyond its useful life, becomes its own kind of problem, and sources close to William say that the period following his father's cancer diagnosis in February of 2024 marked a decisive shift in his willingness to move from observation to action. The king's illness brought the reality of accession into sharper focus than any amount of preparation or planning could have achieved. It made abstract questions about institutional management and the distribution of power within the royal household urgently concrete. And it produced in William a clarity of purpose that those around him describe as the most significant development in his preparation for kingship that they have witnessed. The foundation appointments are the most visible expression of that clarity to date, but sources say they are not the only expression of it. In a series of decisions made across different areas of his institutional life over the past 18 months, William has been quietly but consistently drawing the lines of his future reign. Relationships that no longer serve his vision have been allowed to cool. Advisors whose judgment he has come to question have been moved to the periphery of his circle. Institutional partnerships that were inherited rather than chosen have been reviewed with a critical eye that reflects his growing confidence in his own assessment of what the monarchy needs and what it does not. The foundation removals were the most dramatic of these moves, but they were consistent with a pattern that those watching closely had already begun to identify. What that pattern reveals about the kind of King William intends to be is something that those around him discuss with a mixture of admiration and, in some quarters, apprehension. The admiration comes from his growing decisiveness, his evident seriousness of purpose, and his willingness to make difficult decisions without the kind of prolonged consultation and consensus building that has sometimes allowed problems within the royal household to persist long past the point at which they should have been addressed. The apprehension comes from a concern, expressed privately by some of those who wish him well, that the directness of his approach carries risks of its own, that moving too visibly against the established networks of the current reign before that reign has fully run its course could generate conflicts that complicate rather than ease the transition to his own kingship. William is aware of that concern. Sources say he has considered it carefully and has concluded that the risks of continued accommodation outweigh the risks of the approach he has chosen. His assessment, according to those close to him, is that the institutional problems he is addressing through decisions like the foundation appointments will only become harder to resolve the longer they are allowed to persist. Better to act now, while he still has the freedom of the heir rather than the constraints of the king, than to inherit a household whose internal dynamics have been shaped by years of unchallenged influence from people whose loyalties do not align with his vision. The implications of William's move for his relationship with King Charles are, sources say, more complex than the straightforward narrative of a son acting against his father's wife might suggest. Charles is aware of what William has done. He is aware of the tensions it has produced with Camilla, and he is aware, with the particular awareness of a man who has spent decades navigating the complicated intersection of personal relationships and institutional responsibilities, that his son's growing assertiveness represents something he must reckon with as both a father and a king. Whether he views William's actions as a challenge to his authority or as the necessary preparation of a successor who is taking his future responsibilities seriously is a question that sources answer differently depending on how close they are to the king's innermost circle. What is not in question is the significance of what William has done. He has established, with a clarity that leaves little room for misinterpretation, that the future of the monarchy will be shaped on his terms and built around his values. The royal foundation, cleaned of influences that did not belong there, stands as the most visible symbol of that intention. And for Camilla's circle, for the broader royal household, and for everyone watching the slow but unmistakable transfer of institutional gravity toward the next generation, the message could not be clearer. Did William go too far? Or was this exactly the kind of decisive leadership the monarchy needs from its future king? The balance of power inside the royal family is shifting in ways that cannot be ignored.